All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Dynamic Duo. Um, in real time, it's been a couple of weeks since we've gotten behind the mic together, but I am excited. A lot of life has happened, though, um, in between then and now, and um, in case you didn't catch the last episode, we had started unpacking almost like a side B in a lot of ways to Heath's uh, series on churchosity on church hurt and what that looks like as a pastor, what that looks like as a churchgoer, as a follower of Christ, and what that looks like to still reconcile relationships.
Hmm.
Because we are called to a yes and relationship, right? It's not just a matter of it's only valid in the corporate sense, but it's also not only valid in the individual sense. I do think our personal time with with the Lord helps us to be able to pour into the corporate,
Hmm.
and it's that gathering of the saints portion of things that we talked about last week, because that's a difficult thing to square and all of that. But I wager that when we flush out these bumps in the road, these issues, these problems, these tragedies, and I'm scaling for a reason. Like it doesn't, it's not size dependent. But when we reconcile these things between other people, institutionalized, whatever, the other part of that conversation that we have to have is how do we reconcile that with our relationship with God?
Mm. Yeah.
Because that, whether we like to admit it or not, heartache, tragedy, broken relationships. I mean, Baskin Robbins is open, y'all. This is Burger King over here. You can have it your way, like
Have it your
seriously.
way.
Um, so take your pick. That these things that happen in life, we're foolish if we think that they don't bristle up against our relationship with God.
Hmm.
And that's something that I think we need to be willing to go into and touch on and contemplate and be able to really allow to ruminate.
Sure. Yeah, it's a real, like one of my favorite lines from a movie. It's a riddle wrapped. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside a conundrum.
Yeah.
It because I like how you put it, how you worded that it's a yes and that it's both corporate and private, and it has to be.
Mhm.
Um, and the hurt that you experience, it affects both of those corporately and individually. And I was just talking with a buddy of mine the other day, and we were talking about this concept of why um, why the church loves to fight with itself. That was the context of our conversation. And in that conversation, I said to him, when we gather corporately, it's like probably 90% or more of the people that would gather on a Lord's Day are wrestling with the question of, is God really for me?
Mm.
And when there's, especially when there's tragedy, especially when there's when there's hurt within the body of Christ, broken relationships. You have it, as you say, pick your flavor. In those relationships with the people of God, you it's almost like you take a step back and go, okay, of all the people on God's green earth, that actually it's blue, that we are supposed to feel the most camaraderie and closeness and relationship with, why is it that those people hurt the most? You know, why does it feel like that's where the worst pain comes from in those relationships when they break for whatever reason, or there's damage for whatever reason? And in those moments when you're having those experiences, those real life experiences, you can't help, because we are children of God, you can't help but look up and say, okay, God, are you really for me? And this is where like the Psalms are huge. You know, I mean, one of the reasons why I love the Psalms so much is because David was just so real. He didn't write all the Psalms, but when you read the Psalms that David wrote, he talked with God. Like, he was so real, genuine, and honest with God. And he would say over and over and over again, you know, Lord, how long, O Lord, will you allow the wicked to prosper? How long until you vindicate me? You know, I think it's Psalm 19, where he just opens up with all of these things about him that prove that he is an upright person and has no like deceit in his heart, and he doesn't accept bribery, and you know, all of these things, and yet he seeks vindication from the Lord in the midst of his enemies. And there are days where, especially if you're in the midst of some sort of church hurt situation, there are days where your prayers are like that. You know, God, are you really for me? Because right now it doesn't feel like you are. And one of the things that I love the most about the God that we serve is that he gets that. He totally gets that. And I don't think that you'll find a verse in the Bible condemning a human being for looking at their Abba Father and saying, are you really for me? Because right now it doesn't feel that way. And I think that brokenness and that emptiness is like the perfect opportunity for God's Spirit to really come in and minister and peel away the next layer of the onion of our hearts and say, okay, this is what we're going to work on with you and I right now, you know, or whatever it might be. But that is definitely a real part of the conversation, because in the corporate body of believers, when hurt is being experienced, how it affects you privately, that ripple effect, that's a real conversation for sure.
One of the things that I simultaneously love and hate is when I'm on the air with somebody and they get me while the red light's on, and I'm like, hold it together, the red light's gone. In the words of the great philosopher Heath Brady of Churchosity, that'll preach. So one of the things, everybody's got their go-tos. I've made peace with this. When you pray, you've got your go-tos. And one of my go-tos is thanking God that he is for us and with us.
Mm.
As I sit currently, I wrestle with the question of, I look around and I see honest men getting screwed and unable to provide for their family.
Mm.
I see people grieving the loss of their child. I see this context of my son and my nephew are now united in heaven.
Mm.
And I asked the question, God, are you actually for us?
Mm-hmm.
Where? And so I am one of the things being an addict in recovery. I have learned along the way that one of the most valuable tools that I can have in my toolkit is to be self-aware. It also helps with the fact that I am bipolar. I like gotta know the baseline of where I'm at. It just is what it is. Sometimes it's not helpful being overly self-aware. Sometimes it sucks, but you still have to still having that matters. And so you ask the question, right? I am eternally known as the relationship with God guy, right? The guy who
Mm-hmm.
preaches kingdom, the guy who preaches real tangible relationship. And the rubber hit the road, and now I'm like, bro, what?
Right.
Where are you? And on top of it, I can look around objectively, right? And I can see I have entered into a context as a pastor where I am really close to being a part of the parish model. Like
Mm.
I am in the community that I am serving in a pastoral context, and I love that. I did not choose this community, but 4 years after living here, these are my people. I
Mm-hmm.
love these people. And these people know who I am. They know what I'm about. They know that I'm a pastor. They know who they know. And the rubber meets the road. And there's that part of me in the back of my mind that wants to pull up anchor, rip open those sails, and be like, let's get out of Dodge.
Mm. Yeah.
Especially on the Sunday, what are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? Like, how are
Yeah.
you? How is your week? My nephew died. What are you
Mm.
supposed to do with that? You know
Right.
what I mean? That grounds every single conversation to an absolute halt. But the beauty of all of this is I sit here 13 minutes into a Christian broadcast saying what I'm saying, being and articulating what I'm articulating, to be honest about the fact that, this is what wrestling looks like.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the fight looks like.
Yeah.
This stuff ain't sunshine and rainbows, but it's real. This is the reality of what hurt can do, where it can take your brain and past hurts informing current hurts, what your instinct is to do in times of tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And what's there's a lot to unpack there. But I think that coming at that from the role of a pastor, I think that one of something that the church in itself is very guilty of is taking a pastor and elevating them, putting them up on a pedestal and elevating them to some level of, they have it all together, whatever that looks like. And one of the things that makes the church so beautiful is that none of us has it all together. None of us is perfect, especially the pastor. And in moments like experiencing the personal hurt and the tragedy like that, the humanity in that, the humanity in that is unifying among the body of believers, because it kind of brings everything back into focus, that on this side of eternity, whether it's inside the church or outside the church, the life experience is not always pleasant. As you said, rainbows and butterflies. There is hurt, there is pain, there is trauma, there is tragedy. And wrestling with the emotion of it is very, very real. It's always been frustrating to me when people in the church community won't allow for the realness of the emotional experience for a pastor to go through stuff. But in general, as Christian brothers and sisters, one thing that one really good hope that we can hold on to is that we're called to bear one another's burdens. And that's one of the many blessings of being part of a body of believers, is that you have that support system, that familial love that should be present. It's supposed to be present. Like I always say, that the world will know that we're disciples of Jesus and how much we love one another. And sometimes I think that God allows tragedy in our lives, whatever that looks like, to remind us and retrain our mind that we need each other, that this life as this human experience, this Christian human experience on this side of eternity, is not something that we were meant to go through alone. We were created for the purpose of fellowship anyway. And I agree with you, brother. Like I can't tell you the number of times where something has occurred and I've just been like, you know what? I'm ready. Like I've had it. Like I can't do this anymore. And I appreciate your transparency and I appreciate your honesty. Because that's real life and it's real time. And what's so wonderful about God is that even though we feel like, I'll just be blunt and bold because I've experienced this myself. Even though we go through those moments where it's like, you know what, you don't mean anything that you say, Lord. You are just, you just sit up there and you laugh, and there's got to be a part of you that's narcissistic, and that this is for your good pleasure that I go through this, because the unfairness and the inequality that come with suffering and pain on this side of eternity, as a human being, it can be difficult to not doubt that God is who he says he is. And that's real. It's very, very real.
Yeah. I think the realities of that, so I'll give an example. There are two guys within the network that are guys that we do ministry together, but we've been doing life together for the last couple of years. And when I say that we are like an odd couple pairing between the three of us, like we're really odd couple in a lot of ways, like common love for Jesus, but like pretty much every other way we are either similar enough that it annoys each other or pretty opposed.
Hmm.
And we've gotten to the point now, 2 years in, where we've learned when we just need to let somebody come stomping into the room, do what they got to do, get what they need to get off their chest, and nobody jumps to educate.
Yeah.
And I walked in and I'm like, all right, let me get this straight. All-knowing creator God, right? That's where we're at. All-knowing creator God. Grandiose, all-powerful, made the world, made the heavens, made the earth, the whole shebang, right? Can't save a couple of young lives? No? That's too much? Right? Innocent lives? No? Fallen, what, because of a fallen world? Yeah, that excuse got old. That excuse gets old.
Yeah.
Like, this is innocence. They didn't do jack. Like, seriously. Right. And, you know, it was in that moment, I'm like, yeah, I don't, man, if I didn't have the supernatural fortification of immersive faith because of the Holy Spirit, I would not look at this world and say, oh, okay, a good creator made this. Not a chance.
Right.
And, you know, that's something that sometimes, you know, when you have a band of brothers, you in a safe place like that, I would say to anybody listening, pick and choose where you can do something like that. Not every relationship is made like that. You know, you hope that you do have some that can handle, you know, you get a little while and out, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But that's the thing, right? Like, regardless of the angle, be it through personal tragedy, be it through church abuse or church hurt, you know, hurt by the ones you love, sort of thing. Familial pain, whatever. The questions and the concerns and the doubt and the pain that comes out of that, it almost feels like Christians, by other Christians, are not given the permission to feel that. And just because you're not given the permission to feel it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and so it sits there like an infection. And there's nothing being done about it. Just believe more and it'll go away. Please, oh please, will someone please tell me how in the wide world of sports that you can just believe in something more? Like, what is that? What even is that? Like, that other than just nonsense. And this is me keeping this a PG-13 show. Like, this, that's stupid. You know what I mean? But I almost, like, on one hand, I cycle through this idea of, you know, I wonder if that's why so many times these things that are born out of traumatic events tend to cause the ship to go upside down, because they're not properly, the wound is not properly treated from Jump Street. because
Mm.
in the West, we think we just need to put a band-aid on it because we're afraid to face the fact that we can still love God and say that this life sucks sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm like, I'm at my worst, and I just share this because I really hope that somebody can hear this and hear my heart and hear me say, I love God, I love the church, I love his people. This life sucks. This life is tragic sometimes, and sometimes you've got to live inside of the context of a question that you never get the answer to. You
Mhm.
never get to have that answer. It is not a matter of, oh, well, God must have had a better plan. Please tell me what better plan involves what happened this week.
Right.
Please, oh, please. I'll buy into it. I don't even care if you can legitimately tell me a better plan. I'm good with that because at least it makes sense out of tragedy.
Right. Yep. And that's the real human experience of it, because it's not an either or, it's both. um and you hit on something really, really crucial about how, if it wasn't for the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit, how can you go through this? Like, how could you walk through this, um with any kind of lifeline, really, to grasp white knuckle, um to survive it. And I don't I've been in the church my whole life, and my wife and I call it Christianese. Those canned statements of, well, God had a better plan, or um
God
you
needed an
know
angel.
yeah, all of those kind of things, like, that says so much about our Western church culture.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I really, and maybe this is where my focus is, primarily because of my age and experience, but I'm just really I'm really, really done with the victim blaming. I'm really, really done with because statements like that, God had a better plan. Um, just believe and it'll get better. You know, that puts the onus on the sufferer for being responsible for the hurt, or be the one that's being blamed for the hurt. Like, as if to say, the reason why I'm hurting is because I don't believe in the goodness of God enough. The reason why I'm hurting is because I didn't have enough faith that God's plans are better than mine. The reason why I'm hurting is because this is a fallen and broken world, etc., etc., etc. And that point you made about how this is a fallen and broken world, um, on this side of eternity we suffer from the curse of the fall. While all of that is true, there comes a point where that just makes me want to vomit.
Yeah.
Because where is the goodness of God in that statement? And especially as a pastor, like, you have to have the freedom to go through this stuff in your head and in your heart and in your spirit. And we forget that, Ephesians 4, that God gave some as pastors and some as teachers, etc., etc. And yet we're all the body.
Right.
And just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you don't hurt. It doesn't mean that life doesn't ever suck for you. And it's a real, genuine, honest wrestling match in the heart, in the mind, and in the spirit. whether you're a pastor, parishioner, when a child of God, when a born again to the bone, Holy Spirit filled, Bible believing Christian experiences personal pain, and as you put it, the rubber meets the road, there has to be a space created for, because it's part of grieving, and we in the church do not do a very good job of creating space for grief. And I have, besides my wife, I have 2 other very close friends that I will shoot a text and be like, hey, can I vent? And they're like, yep. And I call and I vent, and then they're just there to listen. They're there to let me be in that bubble and leave it all there. And they don't judge me. They don't criticize me. They don't doubt my faith. They don't doubt my eternal security. They don't doubt my love for Christ and for his church. What they do have, though, is an appreciation for you're having a human experience, and there is nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And then you leave it there. It's over and done with, and you know, you feel better about. You don't necessarily feel better about the situation, but you feel better knowing that you have a Christian brother or a Christian sister that's there to let you have that space. And especially as pastors, if we don't have that space, then our mental health, our emotional stability, it's going to come crumbling down. And so, I would say, if you're listening right now, you got to have that ring of fire, that handful of people that you can just, like you said, Joe, that you could just walk into a room and you're like, all right, check this out. Yeah. I call BS. And the safety net of those type of Christian friendships is priceless. Absolutely priceless. Because you don't have to sit there and argue the theology of the tragedy. Nobody wants to hear that. Even though you're wrestling with it personally, theologically, because that's the context of this conversation. God, are you really for me? Are you really who you say you are? Because this really sucks, and I'm not seeing it. It's important. That safety net is priceless. You have to have that. And I think that the church, that within the church corporately, every single one of us, if we just stop and take a minute, every single one of us knows that we have 1 or 2 of those people. And it might not even be in the church. It could be a relative, somebody that doesn't judge, that just says, come here and let me have it. Light me up with what's on your heart. It's a hard lesson to learn. It took me years to learn it as a pastor and as a Christian, that there are times where I just need to shut up and let my brother or sister have their grief and their moment. They're not there for counsel. They're not there for a Bible study per se. They're not there to unpack the theology of the moment. They're there because they're my brother or sister, and they're entrusting me with their pain.
Yeah.
And their personal experience through it.
And I think I can speak for a whole lot of us who have seen what it means to hand somebody a wound and not have them handle it well. That is a terrifying proposition, to trust somebody with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's not an easy thing to do. And I think part of what you're touching on speaks to why we see such an incredible rate of burnout
Yep.
within pastors. And I never quite understood whenever I would hear somebody say, there's no such thing as walking away from the call. Like, bet. I mean, honestly, like that's not you just stop being a pastor. You know what I mean? Like it's not rocket science here, guys. And I think part of that is a misunderstanding of what the call even means in the first place.
Sure.
Like what you're being called into and where that places you. Because, like you said, there's this elevated status when we look around to some, and it's not, unfortunately, it's not just the pastors that this happens to. A lot of times this happens to anybody that hits that stage.
Sure.
Where they're elevated to a certain degree, and even down to volunteers in some regards, like the person working the coffee bar, or the person working the salmon booth, or whatever, that they're elevated in the same way. And if there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the fact that we are all Christians serving different roles within the body, then there will be a fundamental misunderstanding of the life experience of any one of those members of the body. Because other than a title and responsibility, that person up in the pulpit is the same as the person in the back pew that doesn't want people to see him.
100%. Yep.
And I think part of the issue is that we don't necessarily grasp that. And so if we can't grasp that, then we have no context to handle people going through issues and tragedy. And I would say even internally, if there's no barometer in how to handle these things, then you are left unequipped when those moments happen.
Sure.
To bring it back to where we started the conversation at, that we are left with this question of, God, are you for me? You're left unequipped to be able to handle, well, whoa, what does that mean for my security? What does that mean for my relationship? What kind of Christian am I? And you know what? For all of you fans out there that are athletes, you know that when you are training and your body is like, no, I'm done doing this, I'm gonna you start lifting, and set 1, you're great. Set 2, you're great. Set 3, form starts to break down. Set 4, form starts to break down. 5, you're starting to struggle. That's the mind protecting the body. That's actually a physical response happening from the brain saying, whoa, what's happening to us it hurts. We need to go into defense mode. If a person's walking through the door and they're not being given the permission to wrestle with these things and to make this relationship like livable, like lived in, they're just gonna stop coming. They're just gonna start ignoring it. Like eventually, it's just gonna be like, I don't want to just keep going there to be made to feel bad. I must not be a Christian anyway. This whole thing must be fake. And that's why it goes back to something that I talk about on a regular basis of sitting in the wonder of it all, rest in the stories. The fact that when we read the Bible, we are reading a collection of stories handed down through history, preserved, some to give historical context, others to tell a story about how God interacts with man,
Mm-hmm.
and a variety of others. And that's a snapshot into the ridiculousness that is the Bible and all of its complexities and wonder and everything.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, what happens if we allow for things like what Paul said to Timothy? Go back to the stories that you've heard. What happens if we sit back in awestruck wonder of the fact that when we reconcile this whole Christianity thing, we're reconciling our relationship with an all-knowing creator God? Because that's not the problem is a lot of this stuff that you've heard, a lot of this stuff that people have heard in this context are also used to have the thesis statement of, well, just have a deeper relationship and everything will be okay.
Sure.
Just believe more and everything will be okay. But it's those things that drum up the realness and the reality and the supernaturalness of our relationship with God when we allow for those complexities to take form and take shape and become lived in our lives. So then we have a context in which to wrestle, in which to have doubt, in which to get pissed off, in which to be able to really unpack these things and say, you know what? I get in front of this mic. I get in that pulpit and I tell people, I don't know, any given week, 5 of the 7 days a week, and I think I'm probably missing something when I say that. Oh, that God is real. Oh, that God is for us and with us. Oh, that this relationship, the kingdom is real. All of this stuff, and I get in front of them, and have I led a whole bunch of people like lambs to the friggin' slaughter?
Yeah.
But that's no. But I want people to hear that that's no different than the person in the back of the pew, in the back of the church, in the pew, that doesn't want to be seen because they're just trying to be in the presence of God's people. They're not trying to have in-depth conversations and all of that kind of stuff because they're coming off of a bad experience elsewhere or something along those lines. They're just two different flavors of what it means to allow for your theology, allow for your relationship, allow for all of those things to live in the context of the real world.
Yeah. 100%. You know what made Jesus such an amazing person? Put aside his deity and his godhood and all of that, but in a relational context, Jesus would walk into a situation with another human being and minister to them where they were at, as if to say, I know what you're going through, and it's okay that you're going through it, and we're going to walk through this together. Think about it this way. At the close of the Old Testament canon, between the close of the Old Testament and the opening of the New Testament, there's roughly 420-ish years. And the Jews are left waiting. The Messiah still hasn't come. And then you come into the New Testament era and Jesus shows up and he's doing these signs and these wonders, and he's saying some pretty remarkable things, and he's developing a following, and people are murmuring amongst themselves, could this be the guy? Could this be the one that we've been waiting for? And in Matthew chapter 5, he's on the Mount of Olives, and he turns around, and I just, I love to like play dramatize this up in my brain like a Cecil B. DeMille film, where he just kind of slowly turns around, and the thousands of people on the side of the Mount of Olives all stop like an old E.F. Hutton commercial. And the very first thing that Jesus publicly says to all of his people is, you are blessed, you are happy, you are fortunate, you are lucky if you are poor in spirit. That's the first thing he says. You are blessed, happy, fortunate, lucky if you are spiritually bankrupt, is what he says to them. If that doesn't speak into the context of what you and I are talking about right now, I don't know what else to say, because the most beautiful things, and I can only say this for myself personally, because I can't speak for other people. The most beautiful moments of growth as a Christian, the most extravagant moments of faith building in my life have come out of those moments where the Lord has allowed me to recognize that I need to be spiritually bankrupt, to recognize that I have to come to the end of myself. And that looks different for everybody, but everybody has that experience where we wrestle with the flesh, where we wrestle with what we want, where we wrestle with all of our savvy and all of our prowess and all of our ologies and isms and all of those things, all that stuff that's up here that doesn't, at the end of the day, doesn't mean squat. It's what's in here. Mm-hmm. And until we are spiritually bankrupt, it's almost as if the real work can't happen. And that doesn't have anything to do with, do you have enough faith? Do you believe hard enough? Are you take 2 Psalms and call me in the morning kind of a thing? It's not that. It's that real honest to goodness brokenness before God. Because at the end of the day, if we're being real, if we're being genuine, if we're being honest, the human experience as a Christian is us and Jesus. And as much as we have in common corporately, individually, that's where Christ deals with us. And so I personally have had to wrestle for a long time with the mere concept that there is almost this expectation on this side of eternity that I am going to experience bouts of spiritual bankruptcy, where I am going to experience pain and hurt that is so bad and so deep and so throughout my being that it makes me feel like the imagery of that description, where I'm a beggar in the corner of a room, covering up my face with a hand stretched out to God saying, please throw me a bone. Give me something. And whether it's personal tragedy, church hurt, abuse, whatever that pain, whatever that tragedy looks like, I get it with that imagery of that spiritual beggar in the corner. I got nothing. I literally got nothing, God. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I got nothing. Throw me a bone. And that's where Jesus says you are blessed, happy, fortunate, lucky to reach that point. And I want to say to any and all pastors who are listening, it is perfectly okay to not have the answer. Because if you had all the answers, you wouldn't still need to go to the source. It's okay to say, I really don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But what I do know is that God is still on his throne, and that we are made in his image. And yes, life sucks. And sometimes that's all a person needs to hear. Sometimes that's all a person wants to hear. And the commiseration, the sympathizing, the empathizing, can be summed up in it's okay to be spiritually bankrupt. It is okay, because that is where some of the best work, I would argue probably the greatest work that the Lord can do on our hearts, is when we got nothing left.
Yeah. I think that part of what makes that such a scary proposition is you really are forced into trust. Like,
Mhm.
trust is a weird thing because you choose to put your trust in something, but when you realize that you can't talk your way out of this situation, no amount of high theology or academics is going to pacify this situation. um just allowing for the end of you to come so that way you can be worked on.
Mm.
It's not, and that's not, uh, please don't hear what we're not saying. That's not like within a day, within a week, with
Sure.
like that's not something that's not to be measured in that kind of way.
Yeah, I still haven't arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm the type that, I'll put it this way, I don't think I can find a single thing that blatantly out and out says that the concept of theosis is impossible for in a post Jesus world.
Mm.
I will be the first one to admit that the last time that we saw it was deep in the Old Testament period, so it's not something that we have seen with any kind of recency. But I also believe the Bible when it says that there is a finite number of sins, and it gives us instructions on what to do when we do sin
Mm-hmm.
and what
Mm-hmm.
that looks like. And I do think that there is a continued effect of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
100.
I think that's something that if we can drop the baggage and just go there with no expectations of you have to get back to a certain status quo, otherwise you're going to have a bad appearance to other Christians, or otherwise you're going to upset God, or what have you. If your theology base is based around not pissing God off, what kind of existence is that?
Sure.
And that's one of those things that is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to think about, because for some people that's literally the only context
Mm-hmm.
that they know God in. But if you realize that all if that foundational stuff is in God loving you and all of that kind of stuff, then when all hell breaks loose, you're not starting from a broken well. Now, that doesn't mean that you're immediately going to get water. That doesn't mean that you're immediately going to have like all of the challenges and questions and struggles and all of that kind of stuff are like all of that stuff is going to suddenly go away. One of the things that I have found with contemplative Christians is that they all tend to say something very similar. I love the Psalms because they are an outpouring of emotion.
Mm.
For those of you that didn't know this, I'm a musician. Among the other things that I do, I am a blues musician, and specifically blues because um, I believe in music that you can feel.
Mm.
I believe in um, an experience when you are hearing or playing music, and the reality is that I can be a dark person. I've seen a lot of tragedy. I've seen a lot of life. I have been blamed and accused of being an existentialist before.
Hmm.
That's why I dig the Psalms as much as I do, because that's raw, that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And for my estimation, and again, this goes back to asking that question. If you can't bring yourself to ask that question, then it's not my job to question your relationship. It's not Heath's job to question your relationship. That's between you and God. That's like there's it's not for two guys on the internet to do. That's there's more nuance to the blanket statement that I just gave, but I'll leave it at it's not for two guys on the internet to do. But I would then start to elicit the questions: why do you feel like you can't ask those questions? What about God do you feel like is stopping you? Is it because you think that God can't handle it? Do you think God's going to kick you out of the party because you're asking those questions?
Mm.
Is your relationship not strong enough to withstand those questions? And start to suss that out, because let's be real. If you take the Bible as legit, if you say the Bible's claims are legit, then that means a cat named David lived, walked this earth, like screwed up royally in certain ways, and wrote at a substantive portion of a collection of poetry that most of the time is some just raw boned meat and potatoes guttural cry to God.
Mm.
God, where are you? God, save me. Various forms of that. That's
Yeah.
Bible. That's legit. If you take the Bible as legit, that's right there. That's in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then, I don't know. I guess I asked the question. Then why do we feel the need to, I don't know, protect other people from that, protect God from that? I don't know what, like, that we can't do that nowadays, even though like people that we look up to and people that we hero worship, even though we shouldn't, are have done this very thing.
Right. Yeah, it's baffling to me, and I think that a lot of the reason for that disconnect is just our translation of what biblical times were like, in the West. Like we have this hard time understanding that, or we have this hard time really grasping that the same God who's responsible for inspiring people to write the Bible is the same God that is written about in that Bible, which is the same God that we have a relationship with today.
Yeah.
And Christianese again, We like to say that the Bible is the basic instructions before leaving Earth. We like to say that the Bible is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword. We like to say that we love to say these things. We love to say that even though the Bible was written so long ago, it is 150% applicable to our lives today.
Right.
And then tragedy strikes. And when you're a victim of that tragedy, and you're looking for a space to grieve, a space to question, and that person or persons that you relay those questions to give you those canned Christianese answers, even that contributes to the doubt of the legitimacy of God. Are you really who you say you are? I mean, you know, on the one hand, you have in the Psalms, you have David writing a lot about why are these bad things happening. I'm a musician too, so I totally like everything you said about that. Like, preach, that'll preach. You know, I'm not a jazz musician, but jazz is my favorite style of music. I'm a drummer. I can't play jazz. But anyway, and you just really opened up my eyes and really spoke to my heart there, Joe, when you talked about why you love music. You love to feel it, and that correlation with the Psalms, because they're songs. They're songs that were written. They're poetry that was written for the purpose of putting music to them. So as I was saying, is on the one hand, you have the Psalms that are grieving from a position of frustration and almost angst. Lord, why do you let this happen? Why do you let this go on? But then on the other hand, you have Psalms like, create in me a clean heart. You have Psalms like, search my heart and see if there be any iniquity in there. You have Psalms like, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Against you and you alone have I sinned. Like, nobody talks like that anymore.
Right.
Nobody shares openly and honestly, or creates the space and opportunity for people to share open and honestly their real life walking with God experiences. And I mean, that's why I love the Psalms, because I look at the things that were written mostly by David, which is like 85% of the Psalms, I believe. And that resonates with me. And then come to find out that God considered David a man after his own heart. Oh, what that tells me is that forget about just being a pastor. As a follower of Jesus Christ, It is okay to grieve, to cry out to God, to shake your fist and beat your chest in frustration and angst, and still be considered a man or woman after God's very own heart. And there's so much that is not understandable about that, and yet there's so much there's still so much that is beautiful about that. Because if David, the king of Israel, the guy who slew Goliath, the guy whose throne the Messiah would sit on, if he is capable of, on the one hand, being called a man after God's own heart, but on the other hand, screw up over and over and over again, and still have that heart of repentance, and then on the other hand, wrestle with life's issues and experiences in the face of a holy God. If he can do all of that, how are we any different?
Right.
Because the rules haven't changed. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And reading the words, especially in a meditative context, to really sit and wrestle with the words of the psalmist, to see what David wrestled with, to see what David grieved over, to see how he phrased it. It's very personable. It's very relatable. I mean, how many of us have ever been in a situation with our Christian brothers and our so-called Christian brothers and sisters that murder our character, that slander, that argue and fight, that backbite, that whatever it might be? How many of us have ever been in those situations and had the almost immediate inclination to stop and say, God, why do you allow this to happen?
Right.
Like, that life experience has never changed.
Yeah.
And I think that is a reality that every single Christian needs to, number one, remember is a reality, and number two, give themselves permission to live in that reality, and number three, give other Christians permission to live in that reality as well.
It's good. You know, I think.
Sorry, I got sermonitis there again.
But it's good, and honestly, I think that's a great point to wrap on here, because there's so, like, this is one of those topics where you can go so many different directions with, namely because grief and tragedy takes on so many different forms, and
Sure.
processing this can take on so many different forms. But at the end of the day, if we allow ourselves room for that, but we allow other people room for that, then guys, I'm pretty sure that in application, that ends up looking a whole lot like weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice.
Amen.
Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think we could just end the sermon right there.
All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Dynamic Duo. If you have not caught the first 2 episodes, go ahead and jump over to the playlist and take a look there. Be on the lookout at the time of this recording. I've heard a rumor that there may be new Churchosity material dropping in the near future. So if you have not already, go to wherever you find podcasts and make sure that you are subscribed, because it is sure to be fire. But guys, until next time, appreciate you. Peace.